Dawn broke cold over the Montana territory, painting the Absaroka Range in shades of copper and ash. Wade Garrison stood on his porch, tin cup warming his calloused hands, watching light crawl across land he no longer recognized. 2 years since fever took Sarah and little Rose. 2 years since he'd spoken more than necessity required. The coffee tasted like memory bitter. Dark, best swallowed quick. His ranch deteriorated around him like a living thing dying slow. Fences sagged. The barn door hung crooked on leather hinges. Weeds claimed Sarah's kitchen garden, the place she'd sung while pulling carrots for supper. He'd let it all go to seed and dust. Wade drained his cup, set it on the porch rail where Sarah used to leave his lunch wrapped in cloth. The rail was empty now. Everything was empty now. He descended the steps toward another day of surviving without living. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The barn door needed attention. Wade had ignored it through spring and summer, but autumn was coming and livestock required shelter. He retrieved his toolbox from the tack room, leather hinges groaning under his touch. Inside the box, beneath the rusted pliers and bent nails, his fingers found something that stopped his breath. A carved wooden horse. No bigger than his palm. Rose's treasure. He'd made it during Sarah's pregnancy, whittling by lamplight while his wife dozed in the rocking chair, her hands folded over the swell of their future. The horse had imperfections, one leg slightly shorter. The mane carved too deep, but Rose had loved it beyond reason. She'd carried it everywhere, tucked in her apron pocket, clutched in sleep. Wade sank onto an overturned bucket, the toy cradled in his work-roughened hands. Rose's voice echoed through memory. "Papa, does she have a name? You tell me. Little bird?" "Dancer, because she's going to dance across the whole world." But Rose never saw the world. Fever took her on a Tuesday. Sarah followed on Friday. Wade buried them on the hillside Sunday, their bodies wrapped in the wedding quilt Sarah had pieced during their courtship. He'd thought he'd burned all of Rose's things, thought he'd scoured the house of every reminder. But here was Dancer, somehow overlooked, waiting in darkness to ambush him with love that had nowhere left to go. Wade's hands trembled, his throat tightened. He should keep it, should hold this last piece of his daughter close. Instead, he walked to the house as afternoon shadows lengthened. The cast-iron stove still held morning embers. He opened the door, flames licking weakly at charred wood. The carved horse felt impossibly light in his palm. Rose's laughter seemed to shimmer in the grain of the wood, her small fingers polishing it smooth with endless handling. Wade dropped Dancer into the flames. He watched until the horse blackened and crumbled, until memory became ash. Then he closed the stove door and stood in the cooling kitchen, alone with the particular silence that follows the destruction of irreplaceable things. Evening found Wade on the porch, where he'd spent countless sunsets before Sarah and Rose occupied the rocking chair beside him. Now only one chair remained. He'd chopped the other for kindling last winter during a particularly bitter cold snap, telling himself he needed the wood more than the memory. The lie sat easier than the truth. He pulled his harmonica from his shirt pocket, a Hohner Marine band, purchased in Billings during their brief courting days. Sarah had loved when he played, swaying little Rose in her arms while melodies drifted across the prairie. He'd been better then, his fingers nimble and sure. Now the notes came hesitant and broken. Wade played anyway, an old trail song about lonesome cattle and longer nights. The music carried across his deteriorating ranch, past the sagging fences he pretended not to see. Over the weed-choked garden he walked around rather than through. The melody found no answering voice, no baby's gurgle of delight, no wife's gentle humming harmony, just wind through dying grass and the creak of his solitary rocking chair. 3 steers had wandered through the collapsed north fence yesterday. He'd found them on his neighbor's property, grazing contentedly on better-maintained pasture. The neighbor, a decent man named Harlow, had helped drive them back, saying nothing about the obvious neglect, the broken fence line, the haunted look in Wade's eyes. "You need help with anything, Wade?" Harlow had asked carefully. "Managing fine." Another lie. They accumulated like dust. Darkness crept across the Absaroka foothills, swallowing the last copper light. Wade set his harmonica aside and retrieved his Winchester 73 from just inside the door. He checked it mechanically, a habit from younger days when the frontier held more threat than loneliness. The rifle hadn't been loaded in 18 months. No ammunition in the house except a rusted box in the barn he couldn't remember buying. He laid the Winchester across his lap anyway, its weight familiar and meaningless. Stars emerged, pricking the deepening blue. Sarah used to name them for Rose, making up stories about celestial dancers and silver rivers. Wade had never learned the proper constellations, content to listen to his wife's voice weaving wonder from scattered light. Now the stars were just stars, cold and distant and utterly indifferent to the broken man beneath them. The coal oil lamp in the window behind him guttered low. He should trim the wick, add fuel. Instead, he sat motionless, watching his ranch dissolve into shadow, the leaning barn, the empty corral, the fields gone fallow. Tomorrow he'd work. He'd repair something, mend something, pretend the endless cycle of maintenance could substitute for purpose. Tomorrow he'd survive another day of living without being alive. But tonight, in the particular darkness that follows burning your daughter's last treasure, Wade Garrison simply sat, the rifle across his lap, the empty chair beside him, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient, uncomforting patterns, alone. Mid-afternoon sun beat down on the prairie when Wade noticed the figure on the road. He'd been checking the water trough, finding it lower than yesterday, another crack he'd been ignoring. The shape moved slowly, deliberately, growing larger with each moment. A woman, walking alone. Wade's first instinct was to retreat into the barn, pretend he hadn't seen. He wanted no company, no conversation, no intrusion into the careful architecture of his solitude. But something in the woman's steady approach held him. She walked like someone who'd come too far to turn back now. He waited, tools still in hand, as she covered the final quarter mile. She was tall, taller than most men Wade knew, broad-shouldered beneath a brown calico dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric seemed more suggestion than certainty, patches at both elbows, the hem let down and restitched. A sunbonnet that had faded from some original color to the gray of old dishwater hung down her back, revealing dark hair pulled severely away from a face that might have been pretty if exhaustion hadn't carved such deep lines around the eyes and mouth. She carried a carpet bag held together with twine. "Mr. Garrison." Her voice carried surprising strength for someone who looked ready to collapse. "Wade's fine. Mr. Wade." Then she stopped at a respectful distance, not presuming entry to his property uninvited. "My name is Margaret Langley. I've walked from Timber Creek, 12 miles, in this heat." "That's a fair distance," Wade said carefully. "Yes, sir." She straightened her shoulders, a gesture that seemed to cost her. "I've come to make you a proposition." Wade's jaw tightened. He'd heard about women who came to isolated ranches offering certain arrangements. Sarah had been dead only 2 years. The thought turned his stomach. "I don't work," she interrupted, reading his expression. "I'm offering work, Mr. Wade. I can cook, clean, mend, manage a kitchen garden. I can also handle field labor, mending fences, mucking stalls, anything you need." She lifted her chin. "I can outwork any man when it comes to tasks requiring strength." Wade studied her more carefully. Despite the exhaustion, despite the patched dress and rope-held bag, she held herself with dignity. Pride, even. This was a woman unaccustomed to begging. "You need water," he said finally. Relief flickered across her face. "Yes, sir." "That would be kind." He led her to the rain barrel beside the barn, dipped the tin cup that hung on a nail. She accepted it with hands that trembled despite her rigid posture, drank deeply, then refilled it, and drank again. When she finished, she returned the cup to its nail with careful precision. Thank you. What brings you here? Mrs. Langley. It's widow. My husband Thomas passed 8 months ago. She flexed her fingers, revealing calluses thick as boot leather. I've done farm work before. I'm not afraid of labor. Your husband, he teach you field work. Something complicated crossed her face. He was kind, Mr. Wade, a carpenter by trade, but small in stature. When we had our own place, I managed the heavier tasks. After the fever took him, she paused, swallowed. I buried him myself. The ground was hard. It took most of a day. The casual revelation of that lonely labor struck Wade harder than he'd expected. He understood burying people you loved, understood the particular cruelty of packing earth over what used to be your whole world. Town couldn't help with that, he asked quietly. Town had opinions about me even before Thomas died. Her voice went flat. I'm not built like other women. Mr. Wade, the shopkeeper's wife, calls me mannish, says I'm an affront to proper femininity. Last month, when I asked for credit on flour, Mr. Pemberton refused. Said a woman my size could surely find work more suited to my attributes. Wade saw the flush of humiliation cross her face. Children threw stones at me last week. She continued, each word carefully controlled. Called me names I won't repeat. I have nowhere else to go. No family. Thomas was my family. Her hands twisted together. I'm not worth much. Mr. Wade, I know that, but I'll do anything for a roof over my head. Anything honest. I'll work until I drop. I'll earn my keep twice over. I just need... Her voice cracked on the last word. Wade noticed the bruise then, darkening her left forearm. Recent. Shaped like fingers. That from your husband? He asked, nodding toward it. No, sir. Thomas never laid a hand on me in anger. That's from the butcher's son in Timber Creek. He thought it might be amusing to see if he could make me cry. Her jaw set hard. He could not. The afternoon sun behind her created a silhouette, broad shoulders, strong frame, the posture of someone who'd learned to carry more than should be asked of any person. Her shadow fell long across his dusty yard, and Wade saw in that shadow both immense strength and devastating vulnerability. She misread his silence as rejection. I understand, she said, reaching for her carpetbag. Thank you for the water. I'll try the Harlow place next. I heard they might need... Wait. She froze, hope and dread warring in her expression. Wade surprised himself with what came next. He'd lived in silence for 2 years, perfecting the art of isolation. But looking at this woman, this widow who'd buried her husband alone, who'd walked 12 miles in heat for the chance to be treated as human, something in his chest shifted, something that felt dangerously close to feeling. I do need help, he heard himself say. Place has gotten away from me some. Her eyes widened. You mean... I mean you can stay. Work for wages, not charity. Fair pay. Separate quarters in the old bunkhouse. Respectable arrangement. He met her gaze directly. And Mrs. Langley, you're worth more than you know. She stood frozen in his doorway, afternoon light blazing behind her, casting her powerful frame in gold. When she spoke, her voice cracked with something that might have been tears, or might have been the first breath of hope she'd allowed herself in months. Thank you, Mr. Wade. I won't disappoint you. I don't expect you will, Wade said quietly. Now let's get you settled before dark. The bunkhouse stood 50 yards from the main house, weathered planks silvered by seasons of Montana weather. Wade pushed open the door, hinges protesting with a squeal that said no one had entered in months, maybe longer. Dust motes swirled in the shaft of afternoon light. Cobwebs draped the corners like tattered lace. A mouse had made a nest in the corner using what looked like shredded newspaper and dried grass. The rope bed frame sagged in the middle, but the structure itself remained sound, roof intact, walls solid, floor only slightly warped. "It needs cleaning," Wade said, stating the obvious. "But it's weather-tight. Better than some places I've slept." Langley stepped inside, her tall frame filling the small space. She ran her fingers along the window frame, testing its integrity, then checked the door latch. Her movements were methodical, practical. A woman accustomed to evaluating shelter by function rather than comfort. "It's good," she said simply. "More than good. There's a rope bed frame. You'll need a mattress. I have a cornhusk one in the barn loft. Sarah made extras before." He stopped, cleared his throat. "Before. I'll fetch it down." "I can help carry." "I'll manage." Wade studied the dusty interior, calculating what she'd need. Lamp, wash basin, soap. "I'll bring what I can spare from the house." "Mr. Wade, I don't want to take anything that belongs to—" "My wife is dead. Mrs. Langley." The words came harder than he'd expected. "What belonged to her isn't doing anyone any good in a trunk. Might as well be used." He left before she could respond, walking quickly across the yard to the main house. Inside, the front room felt even more hollow than usual. He'd lived here 2 years without really inhabiting the space, just moving through it like a ghost occupying its own haunting. Sarah's trunk sat beneath the window, a cedar chest her father had built for her 16th birthday. Wade hadn't opened it since packing her things away, but his hands remembered the smooth wood, the brass hinges, the particular weight of the lid, inside folded linens, quilts Sarah had pieced during winters, her everyday dresses he couldn't bear to look at. He lifted out a log cabin quilt wedding ring pattern, stitched in blues and creams. Sarah's fingers had pulled each thread. Her blood probably marked some hidden seam where she'd pricked herself with the needle. Wade pressed the fabric to his face, breathing deep, the scent of cedar, faintly of lavender from the sachets Sarah kept among her things. Nothing of her remained in the weave time had taken even that, but memory supplied what his senses couldn't. He folded the quilt carefully, added 2 cotton sheets, a pillowcase. From the kitchen he retrieved the spare kerosene lamp, the one with the clear chimney that didn't smoke, an enamel wash basin, white with a chipped blue rim, a bar of lye soap, a towel that had been Sarah's but wasn't marked by particular memory, just a towel, serviceable and clean, his arms full. Wade returned to the bunkhouse. Langley had swept the floor with a willow branch, cleared the cobwebs using her sunbonnet as an improvised duster. The mouse nest was gone. The window stood open, fresh air pushing out the stale. "You work fast," Wade observed. "I've had practice making do, Mr. Wade." He set the linens on the bed frame, the wash basin on the small table beneath the window. The lamp went beside it, and he filled it from the can of coal oil he'd brought from the barn. When he lifted the quilts, intending to leave them folded for her to make the bed herself, something in his chest twisted. Sarah's handiwork, given to a stranger, but not a stranger. He realized, a widow, like him. Someone who understood that possessions were just things, and things only mattered when the people who loved you remained to imbue them with meaning. Wade turned, found Langley watching him with careful eyes. He held out the quilts, the wedding ring pattern visible in the fading light. "My wife made these," he said quietly. "She was particular about her stitching. Each piece had to be perfect, or she'd unpick the whole section and start over." He placed the folded fabric in Langley's arms. "You're worth more than you know, Mrs. Langley. These quilts deserve someone who'll appreciate the care that went into them." Her hands trembled as they closed around the quilts. For a moment, she simply stood there, holding Sarah's work against her chest like something precious beyond measure. "I'll treat them with respect," she whispered. "I know you will." Wade stepped back, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment, standing in close quarters with a woman who wasn't his wife. Speaking of things that mattered. "Now, about wages. Standard rate for ranch work is $30 a month, plus room and board. I'll open a credit line for you at Pemberton's store in town. Whatever you need, you charge to my account. He gives you trouble, you tell me. That's generous, Mr. Wade. It's fair. There's work needs doing. Kitchen garden's gone to weeds. Chicken coop needs mucking. Fences need mending. Barn needs attention. Sarah kept order here. Place has lost it without her. He met Langley's eyes directly. I need help. You need work. Simple transaction. What would you like me to start with? Tomorrow's soon enough for heavy work. Tonight, maybe supper, if you're not too tired. I can manage supper. They walked to the main house as the sun touched the western peaks. Wade showed her the kitchen, the cast-iron stove that needed attention, the skillet that wanted reseasoning, the supplies in the larder, salt pork in a cotton sack, beans in a crock, cornmeal, a sourdough starter that had somehow survived his neglect, bubbling quietly in its earthenware home. Langley moved through the space with confidence, evaluating what she had to work with. Her hands were sure as she built up the fire, sliced the salt pork, set beans to soak. Within 30 minutes, the kitchen smelled like a home instead of a hollow shell. They ate at the table where Wade usually took his meals standing, too restless to sit. He watched as Langley portioned the food equal shares, not taking less for herself despite having walked 12 miles and worked the rest of the afternoon. She ate with the steady focus of someone accustomed to hunger, but with dignity intact. My wife, Wade said into the comfortable silence. She liked order, kept everything just so. Garden in neat rows, kitchen organized. Even the henhouse had a system. He pushed beans around his plate. I've let it all go. Grief does that, Langley said quietly. After Thomas died, I couldn't bear to look at his tools. Sold them for nothing, just to have them gone. Later I regretted it. But in the moment, she shrugged. In the moment, you do what you must to survive. Wade nodded, understanding in his marrow. They finished eating as stars pricked the darkening sky. Langley washed the dishes without being asked, her movements efficient in the dimming light. When she finally left for the bunkhouse, she paused at the door. Thank you, Mr. Wade, for this. For... She gestured, encompassing the food, the shelter, the dignity he'd offered. For seeing me as human. Seems a low bar, Wade said. You'd be surprised how many can't clear it. She disappeared into the darkness, lamp swinging in her hand. Wade watched until the bunkhouse window glowed gold, then turned back to his empty house. But it felt less empty than before. In the bunkhouse, Langley unpacked her carpet bag by lamplight. One spare dress, brown like the one she wore. A Bible, water-damaged but readable, a tin daguerreotype of Thomas, his serious face frozen in silver. She set each item carefully in place, then made the bed with Sarah's quilts. The wedding ring pattern seemed to glow in the lamplight. Langley lay down on the cornhusk mattress, pulled the quilts to her chin, and for the first time in 8 months, allowed herself to cry. Not from despair, from relief, from the unexpected grace of being treated as worthy. She fell asleep with tears still wet on her face, and dreamed of morning. 3 weeks passed like water over stone, slowly reshaping the landscape of Wade's life in ways he barely noticed until he looked back and saw how far the current had carried him. Langley woke before dawn. Wade discovered this on the 4th morning when he descended from his bedroom to find coffee already brewing, the rich smell filling the kitchen like a promise. She stood at the stove, her back to him, stirring something in the cast-iron pot. "Morning," he said, uncertain of the etiquette. She turned, no surprise in her face. "Mr. Wade, coffee's nearly ready. I hope you don't mind I found the beans in the larder." "I don't mind." He paused. "You don't have to start so early. I'm accustomed to it. My body wakes with the birds whether I will it or not." She poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed him one. "Besides, there's pleasure in having the kitchen to myself before the day's demands begin." Wade accepted the cup, noting the careful way she avoided encroaching on his space. They'd developed an unspoken dance over the past week, circling each other with respect, maintaining appropriate distance, each occupying their designated sphere. But the spheres were beginning to overlap. He found his work shirt mended on the fifth day, left folded on the porch rail where Sarah used to leave his lunch. The tear at the shoulder, caught on barbed wire 2 months ago, had been expertly stitched with thread that nearly matched the faded indigo. The bone buttons, previously hanging loose, were reinforced and tight. Wade held the shirt, running his thumb over the neat stitches. Langley was in the garden, her broad back bent over young bean plants. He wanted to thank her but couldn't find words that didn't seem inadequate. Instead, the next morning, he brought her fresh milk from the cow he'd been neglecting, set the pail on the kitchen table without comment. She looked up from kneading bread dough, flour dusting her forearms. "Is this for? Thought you might make butter. Sarah had a churn in the cellar, if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all, Mr. Wade." She wiped her hands on her apron, one of Sarah's. He'd given her 3, all practical cotton. "I used to make butter every week for Thomas. It'll be good to have the skill employed again." By the end of the second week, fresh butter appeared at breakfast, pale yellow and sweet. Wade spread it on Langley's cornbread and tasted something he'd forgotten existed: the simple satisfaction of food made with care. The garden transformed under Langley's attention. What had been a weedy tangle when she arrived now showed neat rows of green beans climbing willow stakes, tomatoes swelling on their vines, squash spreading ambitious leaves across turned earth. She worked the garden in early morning and late evening. When the sun's assault lessened, Wade found himself watching from the barn, his hands stilled on whatever task he'd been completing. There was something almost meditative in her movements, the steady rhythm of her hoe, the careful placement of each plant, the gentle way she trained climbing vines onto their supports. She moved through the garden like someone conducting a quiet conversation with the earth itself. One afternoon, he emerged from the barn to find her lifting a water barrel onto the porch. The barrel stood nearly to her shoulder, sloshing with 30 gallons of rainwater. Most men would struggle with the weight. Langley had it hoisted, muscles in her arms standing out in clear definition beneath sun-browned skin. "Let me help with that," Wade called, starting forward. By the time he reached the porch, she'd already settled the barrel in its designated spot, adjusting its position with small, precise movements. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Wade," she said, brushing hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "But I've got it managed." For the first time in 2 years, Wade smiled. Not a sad smile, not a grimace masquerading as pleasantry. An actual smile, surprised out of him by the sheer competence of this woman who'd arrived desperate and hungry and was now running his household with quiet efficiency. Langley noticed. Something in her expression shifted cautious pleasure, as if she'd witnessed something rare and wasn't quite sure she'd really seen it. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just, you're good at this. At carrying water. At all of it." Wade gestured to encompass the garden, the orderly porch, the house behind them that no longer felt abandoned. "Place is coming back to life." She ducked her head, but not before he saw the flush of pride color her cheeks. The garden produced its first real harvest in week 3. Langley spent an entire day making preserves, the kitchen windows steamed and fragrant with cooking fruit. Wade returned from checking the north fence to find mason jars lined up on the counter, their contents glowing ruby and amber in the afternoon light. "That's a lot of jars," he observed. "Green beans, mostly. Some tomatoes. The strawberry patch produced better than expected those jars. There are jam." She wiped her forehead with her apron, leaving a streak of strawberry across her temple. "If you don't mind, I'd like to put these in the cellar. They'll keep us through winter if we're careful." Wade noted. "Not you." She was thinking in terms of permanence now. The realization didn't disturb him as much as it should have. That evening, after supper, Langley lingered at the table instead of immediately retreating to the bunkhouse. They'd fallen into a pattern she cooked. They ate in companionable silence. She cleaned the dishes. She left. But tonight she seemed hesitant, her work-roughened hands folded on the scarred wood. "Mr. Wade, might I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Your daughter, what was her name?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading. Wade's first instinct was to deflect, to change the subject, to retreat into the safe silence he'd cultivated. But Langley's expression held only gentle curiosity. No pity. No morbid fascination, just the simple interest of one human to another. "Rose," he said finally. "Her name was Rose. That's lovely. Sarah chose it. Said she dreamed of flowers the night Rose was conceived. A whole field of wild roses stretching to the mountains. Took it as a sign." Wade traced a groove in the table with his thumbnail. Rose was 3 when the fever came, just starting to talk in full sentences. She had opinions about everything: what dress to wear, what food she'd eat, what stories she wanted at bedtime. She sounds spirited. She was Sarah made small. Same stubborn chin. Same way of looking at you, like she could see straight through whatever excuse you were offering. Wade's throat tightened. "I buried them on the hillside. Together. Couldn't bear to separate them even in death." Langley nodded slowly. Thomas was 31. Fever took him in, 3 days healthy on Monday, gone by Thursday. He'd been building a chest for the minister's wife when he took sick. Never finished it. I tried, but I don't have his skill with joinery. The chest sits in pieces in my old barn, gathering dust. She paused. I think about it sometimes. All the things left unfinished. All the conversations cut short. "Yes," Wade said, because that one word contained everything. They sat in the gathering darkness, the coal oil lamp burning low between them. Outside, crickets sang their evening chorus. The sound reminded Wade of summers when life had seemed permanent, when Sarah hummed in the kitchen and Rose played with cornhusk dolls Sarah fashioned for her. "Mr. Wade," Langley said quietly, "may I ask another favor?" "What do you need?" "My Bible was damaged when I crossed Clear Creek last spring. The ford was higher than I expected, and my bag got soaked. Most pages are readable, but some sections are lost. I saw you have a Bible on your shelf. Might I borrow it for evening reading? I'll be careful with it." Wade's chest constricted. Sarah's Bible. The family Bible her mother had given them as a wedding gift, inscribed with their marriage date and Rose's birth. He'd avoided looking at it for 2 years. Couldn't bear to see Sarah's handwriting in the margins where she'd noted favorite verses. He should say no. Should keep that last piece of her private. Instead, he rose and retrieved the Bible from its shelf. Leather-bound, 1863 edition. The pages gilt-edged and thin as gossamer. He'd watched Sarah read from it every Sunday morning, her lips moving silently over familiar passages. Wade placed the Bible in Langley's hands. "Thank you," she whispered, cradling the book like something infinitely precious. "I'll return it in the morning. Keep it as long as you need." After Langley left for the bunkhouse, Wade sat alone in the kitchen. The lamp flickered low, needing trimming. Through the window he could see the golden glow from Langley's quarters, could imagine her bent over Sarah's Bible, reading by lamplight just as Sarah once had. Something in his chest loosened, not grief releasing its grip, but grief making room for something else, something that felt dangerously close to companionship. Wade trimmed the lamp wick, added fresh coal oil, and carried it to his bedroom. For the first time in 3 weeks, he noticed the house smelled like more than dust and abandonment. It smelled like bread baking, like strawberry preserves, like life being carefully, quietly rebuilt. He lay in bed listening to the night sounds: crickets, wind through grass, the distant call of an owl hunting. And underneath it all, the profound difference made by knowing he was no longer alone on this land. Tomorrow they would work. He would mend fences while she tended the garden. She would make butter while he checked the cattle. They would eat supper at the table, and perhaps, if the silence felt comfortable enough, they would talk again. About the past, about the people they'd lost, about the slow, uncertain process of learning to be human again. Wade closed his eyes and slept without dreaming, which was its own kind of mercy. The sky turned wrong at midday, clouds building fast over the Absaroka peaks, stacking like dirty wool, darkening from gray to bruised purple. Wade stood in the north pasture, studying the fence line that had been sagging for months, and felt his stomach drop. The posts leaned at angles that would never hold against wind. Barbed wire, the new 4-point style he'd strung 3 years ago, hung loose enough that cattle could push through with minimal effort. And beyond the fence, the open range stretched for miles. Once the herd scattered, gathering them would take days he didn't have and help he couldn't afford. 20 head grazed nearby, worth $200 if he could get them to market in Billings come fall. If he lost them to the range, he'd lose the only income that stood between survival and foreclosure. Wade calculated rapidly. 6 posts needed replacing, maybe 8. 50 yards of wire to restring, 4 hours of work, minimum, maybe 5. And the storm would hit in 2, judging by the speed those clouds moved. He couldn't do it alone. Not in time. Harlow was 20 miles north, attending his sister's wedding. The nearest ranch hand lived in Timber Creek, too far to fetch and return before the weather broke. Wade stood alone in the pasture with $200 worth of cattle and a fence that wouldn't survive the next strong wind. Mr. Wade. He turned to find Langley crossing the field, her long stride eating distance. She'd seen him ride out, had followed on foot. "Storm's coming," she said, unnecessarily. "That fence won't hold." "No, it won't. You'll need help." Wade hesitated. The work would be brutal, digging post holes in hard ground, driving 8-foot cedar posts with a sledgehammer, stringing wire tight enough to sing. Back-breaking labor that left men exhausted even in fair weather. But Langley was already walking toward the barn. "I'll get the tools. You start marking which posts need replacing." By the time Wade had flagged 8 failing posts with strips of cloth, Langley returned carrying the post hole digger over one shoulder, a sledgehammer in her right hand, and a canvas bag of staples and wire cutters slung across her body. Leather work gloves, men's size, modified with extra stitching to accommodate her larger hands, protected her palms. She set the tools down with practiced ease. "Where do we start?" "Mrs. Langley, this is hard work. It'll take hours. I can't ask." "You're not asking. I'm offering." She pulled on the gloves, flexed her fingers. "Thomas and I built our entire fence line together. I know what I'm doing." The first post hole took 30 minutes of joint effort, Wade working the digger, Langley using a pry bar to loosen rocks, both of them sweating despite the cooling wind. When they hit 2 feet depth, Langley lifted one of the hand-cut cedar posts 8 feet long, 10 inches diameter, heavy with sap, and positioned it in the hole. "Hold it steady," Wade said, hefting the 10-pound sledgehammer. "I'll drive it. You steady." Before Wade could protest, Langley took the hammer and began to drive the post. Her first swing landed true, the impact resonating up the cedar. Second swing, third, fourth, each blow placed with precision, her powerful shoulders absorbing the shock, her stance solid as bedrock. Wade had driven countless posts in his years ranching. He knew the technique, the rhythm, the brutal toll it took on arms and back. Watching Langley work, he saw someone who understood the labor in her bones. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just steady, relentless competence. The post sank 6 inches with each series of blows. "Your turn," she said after driving it halfway, handing over the hammer. "We'll trade off. Work faster that way." They fell into rhythm: dig, position, drive, tamp, trade places. Dig, position, drive, tamp. The sky darkened further. Wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain from distant mountains. Thunder rumbled, still far but approaching. Wade's arms burned. His back screamed, but beside him, Langley maintained her pace, digging post holes with the steady persistence of someone who'd learned that stopping meant failure, that the only way through hard things was straight forward. On the 4th post, Wade paused to catch his breath. Langley continued digging, the post hole digger biting into earth with each thrust. She'd removed her sunbonnet, tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. Sweat darkened her dress between her shoulder blades. Dirt smeared her face and arms. She looked magnificent. The thought arrived unbidden and undeniable. Not despite her strength because of it. Not despite the physical power that made other men uncomfortable and other women cruel because of it. Langley in this moment, driving toward an impossible goal with absolute determination, represented everything Wade had forgotten to value in his grief. Partnership, resilience, the willingness to stand beside someone and share the weight. "Your husband," Wade said, the words escaping before he'd fully thought them through. Langley paused. Post-hole digger suspended mid-thrust. "Sir." "Thomas." He was lucky. Something shuddered in her expression. "Because I can dig post holes." "No." Wade set down the sledgehammer, met her eyes directly. "Because you don't quit. Because when something needs doing, you do it. Not for show, not for praise, just because it needs doing." He gestured to the fence line, the storm building above them, the work still remaining. "That's not about strength, Mrs. Langley. That's about character." Her hands trembled on the post-hole digger. Her throat worked, swallowing hard. For a moment, Wade thought she might cry, but she blinked rapidly and nodded once. "He used to say that," she whispered. "Thomas. He'd say, yeah, Maggie, you're the steadiest person I know. The town women, they said I was stubborn, unwomanly, that my refusal to be delicate was a moral failing. The town women are fools." A laugh burst from her, surprised and genuine. "Mr. Wade, they are fools who mistake endurance for obstinacy, strength for defiance. You're not unwomanly, Mrs. Langley. You're just more woman than their narrow minds can comprehend." This time the tears did come, spilling down her dirt-streaked cheeks. But she was smiling too, her face transformed by an expression Wade could only describe as relief. The relief of being seen, truly seen, and not found wanting. "We should finish this fence," she said, voice rough. "Yes, we should." They worked through the next 2 hours without stopping. Thunder cracked closer. Lightning split the darkening sky. The first fat raindrops began to fall as Wade hammered the final staple into the last post, securing fresh barbed wire that sang with proper tension. "Run!" Langley shouted. "Already moving!" They sprinted for the barn, rain opening up in earnest halfway across the pasture. By the time they reached shelter, both were soaked through, gasping, laughing with the adrenaline of completed work and narrowly avoided catastrophe. Wade shook water from his hair, watching rain sheet across his land. Behind the fence they'd just completed, 20 head of cattle grazed peacefully, unaware how close they'd come to scattering across the territory. "We did it," Langley said, leaning against the barn wall, chest heaving. "We did. I can't feel my arms." "Me neither." She looked at him, rain dripping from her hair, mud caking her dress, exhaustion written in every line of her body. And she was smiling, really, truly smiling in a way that suggested she'd forgotten how good it felt to be useful, to be needed, to be valued. Wade realized with sudden clarity that he was smiling too. That evening, after they'd both cleaned up and Langley had produced a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Wade did something he hadn't done since Sarah's death. He went to the barn and retrieved the second rocking chair. Langley emerged from the bunkhouse to find Wade on the porch, 2 chairs positioned side by side, both facing the sunset that had broken through the storm clouds. Gold and copper light painted the prairie, and the air smelled clean and new. "Mr. Wade?" she asked, uncertain. "Thought you might like to sit a spell, after the day we had." She climbed the porch steps slowly, settling into the chair with a sigh of relief. They rocked in silence for several minutes, watching light fade from the mountains, listening to water drip from the eaves. Wade pulled his harmonica from his shirt pocket. "Do you mind? Please." He began to play not the lonesome trail song of solitary evenings, but something lighter, a tune Sarah used to request, about spring meadows and dancing. His fingers found the melody easier than they had in months, the notes clear and true. Beside him, Langley began to hum, softly at first, almost inaudible. Then with more confidence, her alto voice finding harmonies Wade hadn't known existed in the simple tune. The music wove between them, creating something neither could have achieved alone. When the song ended, they sat in companionable silence, rocking gently. "Thank you for today," Wade said. "For the fence. For not quitting. Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Wade. For seeing all of me. Not just the parts that make others uncomfortable. I see you, Mrs. Langley. I see you clear." Stars emerged above them, pricking the darkening blue. The porch lamp glowed warm behind them, casting their shadows long across the yard, two figures side by side, equal in the night, neither diminished by the other's presence. For the first time since fever took his family, Wade felt something other than grief. He felt hope. The wagon needed supplies. Wade could no longer postpone flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition for hunting come fall. 6 weeks had passed since Langley's arrival, and his stores had dwindled to bare necessities. A trip to Timber Creek was unavoidable. He found Langley in the chicken coop, gathering eggs in her apron. "I'm heading to town this morning. Wondered if you'd like to come along." She went very still, her hand frozen on a brown egg. "To Timber Creek. Unless you'd rather not. I know the town hasn't been kind." Langley carefully transferred the eggs to a basket, her movements deliberate. Wade could see the war in her expression, the desire to hide warring with the need to prove she could hold her head high. "I'll come," she said finally. "I should face them eventually." "You don't have to face anything. We'll get supplies and leave. Simple as that." "Nothing simple when you're built like I am, Mr. Wade." An hour later, they set out in the wagon, Langley in her better dress. Dark green wool she'd brushed clean of dust. The cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother pinned at her throat. She'd arranged her hair carefully, pulling it back in a severe bun that emphasized the strong lines of her face. Her hands twisted in her lap. "They'll talk," she said, as Timber Creek's buildings appeared on the horizon. "Let them. They'll say things about you. About us. About what kind of man keeps a woman like me on his property." Wade guided the wagon around a rut in the road. "Mrs. Langley, I've buried my wife and daughter. I've sat alone in that house for 2 years waiting for something to matter again. You think I care what narrow-minded gossips say about me? Your reputation is my concern, not yours." He glanced at her. "You've worked harder than any hand I could have hired. You've restored order to my home and my land. Anyone who wants to make something ugly out of that says more about themselves than about us." She nodded, but her hands continued their anxious twisting. Timber Creek was small, one main street lined with false-fronted buildings. A church at the north end, saloon at the south. The general store occupied prime position in the center, its porch crowded with barrels and farm equipment. Wade guided the wagon to the hitching post, set the brake, and climbed down. He came around to Langley's side, offering his hand. She took it, descended carefully, and straightened her shoulders in a gesture Wade had learned meant she was armoring herself against the world. The store's interior was dim after the bright morning sun, and it took a moment for Wade's eyes to adjust. When they did, he found a half-dozen people inside Mrs. Pemberton behind the counter, her husband in the back room, 2 ranch wives examining fabric, a young boy near the penny candy jars. Conversation stopped the moment Langley crossed the threshold. Mrs. Pemberton's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. One of the ranch wives, Wade recognized her as John Harlow's sister-in-law, made a small sound that might have been surprise or might have been disdain. The boy stared with undisguised curiosity. "Morning, Mrs. Pemberton," Wade said evenly. "I'll need flour, 20 pounds, sugar, 10, coffee if you've got fresh beans." "Of course, Mr. Garrison." Mrs. Pemberton's voice carried false sweetness. "We weren't expecting you. Or your companion. Mrs. Langley works my ranch. She's here to purchase supplies on my account. Langley had moved to the far wall where dry goods were shelved, her back rigid. She studied labels with intense focus, as if reading each one required her complete attention. I see, Mrs. Pemberton said, her tone suggesting she saw entirely too much. She leaned slightly toward the ranch wives, lowering her voice just enough to maintain the pretense of discretion. Shame, really. A woman that size living alone with a man. People will talk. You know, they already are. Wade set his hands on the counter, his voice remaining calm but carrying an edge that brooked no argument. Mrs. Langley is a widow who's found honest work. She maintains a separate residence on my property and conducts herself with complete propriety. Anyone suggesting otherwise is trafficking in lies. I'm merely saying what others have noticed. Mrs. Pemberton sniffed. A woman of her proportions. It's unseemly. Poor Thomas must be rolling in his grave. Thomas was lucky to have her, Wade said flatly. As am I. Now, about those supplies. Langley approached the counter with a list written in careful script on brown paper. I'll need thread if you have it, black and indigo, needles, size 8, and lye soap 2 bars. Mrs. Pemberton took the list with obvious reluctance. Her mouth pursed as if she'd tasted something sour. This will all go on Mr. Garrison's account. It will, Wade confirmed. Unless that's a problem. No problem at all. Just surprised you'd extend such generous credit, given the circumstances. The circumstances being that Mrs. Langley does an honest day's work for honest wages. Wade's patience was thinning. Yes, Mrs. Pemberton. That's exactly the kind of circumstance that warrants credit. While Mrs. Pemberton gathered supplies with theatrical slowness, Wade noticed the boy couldn't have been more than 10, still staring at Langley. Wade recognized him now, the butcher's son, probably one of the children who'd thrown stones. The boy's face held not cruelty, but fascination, the way children stare at anything that challenges their limited understanding of the world. Wade crossed to the penny candy jars, selected 2 peppermint sticks, and paid with coins from his pocket. He returned to the boy, held out one of the striped candies. Here. For you. The boy's eyes widened. For me. Kindness costs nothing, Wade said, loud enough for the entire store to hear. Sometimes just seeing a person really seeing them is the kindest thing we can do. He handed the second peppermint stick to Langley, whose eyes had filled with tears she was too proud to shed in present company. Thank you, Mr. Wade, she whispered. Mrs. Pemberton loaded their supplies with pursed lips and disapproving silence. When she tallied the bill, Wade paid in silver dollars, counting them onto the counter one at a time. Keep accurate records, he said. Mrs. Langley is now authorized to purchase on my account whenever necessary. I expect her to be treated with the same respect you'd show any of your customers. Of course, Mrs. Pemberton said, her tone suggesting anything but outside. Wade loaded supplies into the wagon while Langley stood on the porch, her chin high despite the stares from passing townsfolk. A woman crossing the street made a show of pulling her children close, as if Langley's mere presence posed some threat to their virtue. Let's go home, Wade said quietly. The ride back was silent, but not uncomfortably so. Langley held her peppermint stick without tasting it, turning it slowly in her fingers, staring at the horizon. I'm sorry, she finally said, for making things difficult, for bringing judgment down on you. You didn't bring anything, Mrs. Langley. They brought their small-mindedness. That's not your burden to carry, but your reputation. Will survive, or it won't. Either way, I know what's true. He guided the wagon around a stone. You work hard. You're honest. You've helped me rebuild something I thought was permanently broken. Anyone who can't see the value in that isn't someone whose opinion I need. They'll keep talking. Probably. It might get worse. Might. You could ask me to leave. Save yourself the trouble. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to face her directly. Mrs. Langley Margaret, you're not alone anymore. You understand, whatever comes, we face it together. Not because you're obligated, but because that's what decent people do. They stand with each other. She pressed her hand to her mouth, the peppermint stick forgotten. Tears spilled over, running down her wind-chapped cheeks. No one stood with me since Thomas died, she said brokenly. Not one person. I'm standing with you now. They completed the journey in silence, but when they reached the ranch, Langley didn't immediately retreat to the bunkhouse. She helped Wade unload supplies, moving with her characteristic efficiency despite her emotional turmoil. When the last sack was stored, she paused at the kitchen door. Mr. Wade. Yes. Thank you. For today. For standing beside me. Not behind me, beside me. That's where partners stand. Mrs. Langley. That evening, after a quiet supper, Wade found himself on the porch again with Langley in the second rocking chair. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. The day's confrontation had established something: not just Wade's willingness to defend her, but his unwillingness to let others define what was right and proper when it came to his life and his choices. Stars emerged, brilliant against the darkening sky. In the distance, a coyote called. Langley's rocking chair creaked in gentle rhythm with his own. We'll need to go back to town eventually, she said. We will. They won't change their minds about me. Probably not. Does that bother you? Wade considered the question, surprised to find the answer clear. No, Mrs. Langley, it doesn't bother me at all. She nodded slowly, and in the lamplight from the window, Wade saw her smile, small but genuine. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, possibly more judgment, but tonight they rocked in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found in each other something rare and valuable: acceptance without conditions, respect without reservation, and the beginning of something that felt dangerously close to belonging. Late afternoon sun slanted through the bean plants, casting shadows across the kitchen garden where Wade and Langley worked in comfortable silence. 7 weeks had passed since her arrival, and the rhythm of their shared labor had become as natural as breathing. She weeded between tomato plants while Wade repaired the garden fence, both content in the quiet companionship they'd cultivated. The beans will be ready for a second harvest next week, Langley observed, brushing dirt from her hands. We could preserve another dozen jars if... She stopped mid-sentence, her entire body going rigid. Wade looked up to see a rider approaching from the east, silhouetted against the lowering sun. He felt Langley's fear before he understood its source: the way she'd gone absolutely still, the way her breathing had changed from easy to shallow. Mrs. Langley, it's him, she whispered. Thomas's brother. The rider drew closer, revealing a man in his 40s wearing a dusty frock coat better suited to city streets than prairie travel. His face held a particular kind of cruelty, the sort that came wrapped in respectability and family obligation. A riding quirt dangled from his saddle, unnecessary for the docile mare he rode. Wade stood, positioning himself slightly in front of Langley, not blocking her, but present, solid. The rider reined in at the garden fence, his eyes passing over Wade dismissively before settling on Langley with an expression that combined ownership and contempt. Margaret, he said, not dismounting. You've been difficult to locate. Mr. Cyrus Langley, I presume, Wade said evenly. And you are... Wade Garrison, this is my property. State your business. Cyrus finally looked at Wade properly, assessing him with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to measuring other men's weaknesses. My business is with my brother's widow. Family matter. Nothing to concern you, Mr. Garrison. Mrs. Langley works for me. That makes her welfare my concern. Works for you. Cyrus's smile was oil over ice. Yes, I've heard about this arrangement. Quite convenient, I'm sure, for both parties involved. Wade felt Langley flinch behind him. He kept his voice level, refusing the bait. State your business, Mr. Langley. Then you can ride back to wherever you came from. Cyrus dismounted with theatrical slowness, brushing dust from his coat. From an inner pocket he produced a folded document, yellowed paper covered in official-looking script. My late brother's tools and equipment were never properly inventoried after his death. According to family law, he waved the document. Margaret owes the Langley family recompense for property that should have passed to blood relatives, approximately $300, by my calculation. That's a lie, Langley said, her voice small. Wade had never heard her sound small before. I sold Thomas's tools for $17, barely enough to pay for his burial. Your debts are considerable, Margaret, far beyond your capacity to repay through honest labor. Cyrus's eyes swept over her dismissively. The family has decided it would be best if you returned east. My household requires domestic help. You can work off your obligation there. Mrs. D. Langley isn't going anywhere, Wade said. That's not your decision, Mr. Garrison. Family matters supersede the arrangements of strangers. Cyrus stepped closer, lowering his voice to something approximating concern. Surely you see the impropriety of the situation. A woman of Margaret's size, living alone with an unmarried man. People are already talking. The decent thing would be to release her to proper family supervision. The decent thing, Wade said, his jaw tight, would be to leave. Now. I'll return tomorrow with the county sheriff. We'll see what the law has to say about family obligation and unpaid debts. Cyrus turned his attention back to Langley, who seemed to have shrunk into herself. I suggest you pack your belongings. Margaret, save yourself the embarrassment of a public dispute. He remounted, but before leaving, pulled a pocket watch from his vest silver with an engraved case Wade recognized from Langley's description, Thomas's watch, the one his father had given him on his 16th birthday. You'll want to bring Thomas's watch, Cyrus said, dangling it deliberately. Wouldn't want to be accused of theft on top of everything else. That's Thomas's, Langley breathed. You took it from our house after the funeral. Nonsense. It's family property, bae, always has been. Cyrus pocketed the watch, smiled without warmth. Until tomorrow. Margaret, pack light. You won't need much where you're going. He rode away, the quirt swinging against his leg, leaving silence heavy as stone in his wake. Wade waited until Cyrus disappeared over the rise before turning to Langley. She stood frozen in the garden, her hands clenched at her sides, her face drained of color. Mrs. Langley, I have to go. Her voice came from somewhere far away. I have to leave before he involves the sheriff, before he destroys your name along with mine. We'll fight this. That document is probably forged, and even if you don't understand. She looked at him finally, her eyes desperate. After Thomas died, Cyrus came to the house, said I should be grateful for family willing to take in a woman like me. He tried to. She swallowed hard. Thomas had always stood between us. Without Thomas there, Cyrus thought he could. But I fought back, pushed him down the porch steps. He hit his head on the railing. Good. The family blamed me, said I'd always been trouble, that my unfeminine strength made me dangerous, that Thomas had died early because living with me had weakened him. Tears streaked her face now. They said if I knew what was good for me, I'd disappear, so I did. But Cyrus never forgot, never forgave. He struck you. Once, before Thomas stopped him. Thomas was small, but he had courage. He told Cyrus to never touch me again, or he'd involve the law. Cyrus hated him for it, hated us both. Wade listened without interruption as the story poured out years of cruelty disguised as family concern, of Langley's strength treated as aberration rather than gift. of Thomas's death providing Cyrus with the opportunity he'd been waiting for. "He'll come back tomorrow," she said when the words ran out. "With the sheriff, with that forged document, with lies about debts and impropriety. He'll destroy you to get to me. I won't let that happen. So you'll just go back to being his unpaid servant. Let him win. To protect you. Yes." Her voice broke. "You've given me more in 7 weeks than the world gave me in 7 years. Dignity, respect, a place to belong. I won't repay that by dragging you into my nightmare." She turned toward the bunkhouse, her shoulders bowed under invisible weight. Wade let her go, knowing she needed space to make her decision, but also knowing what he would do when darkness fell. The hours until evening stretched interminable. Wade forced himself through evening chores, checking livestock with mechanical precision while his mind churned through possibilities. The law would likely side with Cyrus' family trumped employment, especially when the employer was an unmarried man and the employee a woman living on his property. Public opinion would seal the matter, unless Wade removed that final objection. Full dark had fallen when Wade walked to the bunkhouse. Through the window he saw lamplight, saw Langley's shadow moving back and forth. He knocked once, then entered without waiting for permission. She stood beside the rope bed, her carpet bag open, already half filled with her meager possessions. Her hands trembled as she folded the green wool dress. "Mrs. Langley, I'll leave before dawn. He won't find me here when—" Wade crossed the small space, took the carpet bag from her shaking hands, and set it firmly on the floor. "You're not leaving. I have to protect you." "No!" He stood before her, this woman who towered over him in height but had been made to feel small by cruelty disguised as propriety. "I choose you, Margaret. Not my reputation, not the town's approval, not even my own comfort. I choose you. You don't understand what you're saying. Cyrus will destroy. Let him try." Wade reached up, took her work-roughened hands in his. "Tomorrow, when he comes back, we'll tell him the truth, that you're not going anywhere, that I won't allow it, that if he wants to involve the law, we'll let the law decide whether a woman has the right to choose her own life." Wade, his given name, spoken for the first time, barely a whisper. "Stay," he said simply. "Stay and let me stand with you. Not because you need protecting, you're the strongest person I've ever known, but because no one should have to face cruelty alone. Stay because this is your home now. Stay because I need you here." The words he didn't say hung in the lamplight between them. "Stay because I love you." Because somewhere in the past 7 weeks, grief had made room for hope. And hope had made room for something he'd never expected to feel again. Langley's tears fell freely now, dropping onto their joined hands. "He'll come tomorrow. Then we'll face him tomorrow. Together." She nodded, and Wade felt the tension drain from her frame, not resignation resolution. The decision to stop running, to stand her ground, to believe she might deserve the life they'd been building together. Wade released her hands, picked up her carpet bag, and deliberately unpacked it. Each item returned to its place, the spare dress to its nail, the Bible to the small table, the tin daguerreotype of Thomas back to its spot beside the lamp. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Wade." She stopped him at the door. "Thank you. For choosing me. Always, Margaret. I'll always choose you." He left her in the lamplight, standing in the center of the small room that had become her sanctuary. No longer preparing to flee, but preparing to fight. Tomorrow Cyrus would return. Tomorrow the battle would begin. But tonight, in the darkness between the bunkhouse and the main house, Wade looked up at the stars and made his peace with the decision. He would stand with Margaret Langley against her past, against the judgment of narrow minds, against every force that sought to make her small. He would stand with her, and he would not yield. as darkness settled over the Montana Territory. Two souls prepared to face judgment, not from any higher authority, but from the narrow minds of those who mistook conformity for virtue. Wade Garrison had learned that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the person who sees your worth when the world insists you're worthless. Sometimes it's choosing to stand beside someone when standing alone would be easier. Margaret Langley had spent years believing the lie that her strength made her unworthy of love. But Wade taught her a different truth, that dignity isn't granted by those who judge from a distance, but claimed by those who refuse to accept cruelty as their portion. Together, they discovered that gratitude flows both ways, from the one who receives shelter to the one who finds purpose in offering it, from the widow seeking refuge to the widower learning to live again. The greatest families aren't built on shared blood, but on shared courage, on choosing to stand when others would flee, on seeing the humanity in those society has deemed unacceptable. Now, a question for you. Have you ever been judged unfairly like Margaret for something beyond your control? Or have you witnessed someone stand up for another person when no one else would share your story below?